This is the third week in a row that we've presented an MPW event. The first was Comedy and Politics. The second was a panel on adaptation that was moderated by Gina Nahai. And tonight we are delighted to welcome poet, nonfiction writer, and performer Molly Peacock to USC. The MPW program is a multi-genre program that offers workshops in poetry, nonfiction, fiction, and writing for stage and screen. And if you're interested in the program, feel free to talk to me afterwards, and there are brochures. And I see that you have the handouts that we made up earlier in the evening. And there are also books for sale available at the back of the room, and Molly Peacock will be available to sign them also afterwards. I also want to mention the structure of the evening. I'll introduce Molly. Molly will read, and if you feel questions brewing during her reading, make a mental note of them, because she'll also be doing a Q&A as part of her reading. The poems that I've passed out in that little handout, which they include a few of her poems from her latest book entitled The Second Blush, which was just published by Norton. Her other collections of poems include Cornucopia, Original Love, Take Heart, Raw Heaven, and Live Apart. She's also the author of How to Read a Poem and Start a Poetry Circle, and her literary memoir is entitled Paradise, Piece by Piece. Her essay entitled Passion Flowers in Winter was selected for inclusion in the 2007 Best American Essays edited by David Foster Wallace. And I wanted to say a few words about this remarkable essay, which starts with this line as a sort of thrown gauntlet, quote, "Imagine starting your life's work at 73, which is what Mrs. D did," end quote. This essay is a consideration of role models, and it's a biographical sketch of the life of Mrs. Mary Delaney, who invented paper-made flower mosaics. Later in the essay, this line appears, quote, "What interests me is that a life's work is always largely unfinished, and it requires creativity till the day a person dies. But where are the models? Where are the readily apparent models for all of us who still consider that we are inventing a life? Because the process of inventing your life seems to go on all your life, I have found that my search for role models has gone quietly on," end quote. The essay has a parallel structure, a biographical sketch, and quick study and elegy for her own mother, Mrs. P, is also woven through the essay. In her prose, as in her poetry, Molly Peacock displays a formal symmetry that makes the structural encounter with the work memorable. By juxtaposing these two lives, she articulates her own life and creates realms for a reader to cultivate her own understanding of what patterns and what role models are for and what they provide. On your handout, you'll also see there's a bio for Molly Peacock, and you can see that her own literary trajectory would make a compelling role model for any young writer. She has had a life as an aesthetic citizen as well as a poet. She's the editor of the anthology The Private Eye, Privacy in a Public World, and co-editor of Poetry in Motion, 100 Poems from the Subways and Buses. She's president emerita of the Poetry Society of America and was one of the originators of Poetry in Motion. If you've been on the subway in New York, you know what a respite it is to look up and see a poem by E. Cummings or H.D. or anyone, anything other than an advertisement. And they're just so beautiful, and it's an amazing feat that you pulled off there. She has been an honorary fellow at the Johns Hopkins University and served as poet in residence at the American Poets Corner at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and these days she's in residence at CUNY Graduate Center. And she's also the author of a one-woman show in poems called The Shimmering Verge, which we hope she'll perform here in Los Angeles sometime. She's, beyond all these other things, she's a formally adept and deeply musical poet. Her latest book, The Second Blush, contains sonnets and villanelles, and indeed one of the poems that I've included in your handout is a villanelle that she's written off of the Rutke villanelle, The Waking. So just looking at those two is such a pleasure. I've also included the gorgeous opening poem of the book that she invokes, where she invokes the night, a cadence, a spell, a charm, a riddle. It's a sensually delightful poem. Her poems are full of detail of the portraits of lives of girls and women, from schoolgirls at the museum to the Sheila na gig in Ireland. The events of the poems include the death of a cat, Fellini, an accident, a mistake. They are domestic poems, but they are above all poems about love and relationships to the world, not only to other people, but also to things and to ideas, to things, domestic things like paper clips and teacups, as well as orchids and taxi cabs, the stuff of a life. In his autobiography, Yeats writes that everything personal soon rots unless it is packed in ice or salt. And he talks about ice and salt being form. And I feel like we have with us one of the great users of form in poetry with us this evening. So I'm delighted to welcome, please join me in welcoming Molly Peacock. Now it's my turn. Okay. All right. We'll put it here just in case I decide to take my jacket. Well, if I take my jacket off, I'll remove the microphone. Pretty chilly. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that introduction. We were so busy pinning my microphone on, I didn't have a chance to thank you. But I got so curious about this handout. I haven't seen it. Does somebody have one? I want to see what's on it because I might read a poem or two from it. Yes, I loved it. Oh, thank you very much. I almost snuck a look at it when you were holding it, but thanks a lot. It's always an interesting experience to hear yourself introduced. And many of you, are most of you in the graduate program? So some of you will be giving readings and stuff like that, and you'll be hearing yourself introduced. It's a slightly out of the body experience to hear that and to sit there and think, I am that person. But it's a slightly, what can I say, a little bit shinier version of the person I think I am. So I appreciate it. I like to be shined up. I'm going to read mostly from my new book, The Second Blush, and a couple of poems. Oh, look at this! And I'm going to take as my guide this handout, and I might read a couple of poems from Cornucopia as well, since at dinner a couple of people were mentioning poems from it, so I think I'll do that as well. I was doing a one-woman show in poems, and I was doing a lot of performing. But as I was saying to Bridget before, I really am a poet. I'm really a writer. I really rather stay in my bathrobe in the morning writing than do all of my exercises and run my lines and prepare to go out on stage. But so when I was doing all of that stage work, I wanted to make sure that I had a writing life. So I gave myself an assignment. You're never too old to give yourself an assignment. And my assignment was 14 lines, single image. That's all. It wasn't write a sonnet. It was just 14 lines and a single image. And the reason I said the single image is I was giving a lecture in a library. And I was going on and on about poetry and all these examples. And one man finally raised his hand and said, but what about those lovely, those beautiful small poems that just have, well, a cup and a saucer in them? Those are the kind I like. And I thought, yeah, I like those too, but I haven't really written them. So maybe it's about time. So I'm going to start off with the first poem in The Second Blush. It's the one that Bridget mentioned about night. A city mouse darts from the paws of night.
a body drops from the jaws of night. A woman denies the laws of night, awake and trapped in the was of night. A young man turns in the gauze of night, unraveling the cause of night, that days extend their claws at night, to reenact old wars at night, though dreams can heal old sores at night, and spring begins its thaw at night, while worry bones are gnawed at night. He sips her through a straw at night. Verbs whisper in the claws of night. A finger to her lips, the pause of night. Written by an insomniac. When I was a young writer, I was looking for that, what was it, Ice and Salt. That's a wonderful quote, and I should know it, and I didn't, so I learned this thing. I was looking for ice and salt because my emotions felt, there was such a heat of my feeling in me, and I didn't know how to use it. I knew that I didn't just want to like blurt something out on the page. I just didn't want to vomit something on the page and call that art. I wanted to make art, and I wanted to make art objects. And I've always thought of the poem as an art object, but it was only when I began to teach myself how to write formally that I had a place for all the heat of my feelings. People think of a sonnet. You remember maybe you remember a high school teacher telling you that a sonnet was a container. My high school teacher said it was like a vase, and you poured your emotions into it. And that's how people feel like they're in jail in a sonnet. They're contained, and they can't get out of there. But later on, the poet Richard Howard said to me, "Oh," he said, "you think of form as the outside of something. It's the inside of something." And then suddenly I thought, oh, a sonnet is a skeleton. It's the bones of something. And then I can make the flesh and the organs and the body. I can make the living body out of those bones. Once I got that and realized it was inside something, and it was going to hold up all of those emotions, it liberated me to keep trying them. And that poem that I just read is a sonnet and a guzzle. I didn't realize it was a sonnet and a guzzle. Somebody had to point that out to me, I have to say. But now I'm really impressed that I managed to make that. The other thing that writing formal poetry did for me was that it allowed me to be imperfect. I think of a poem as a handmade object. And any handmade object, just think of a handmade chair, for instance, or a handmade chest of drawers, or a table. There are always flaws in it. There are always mistakes. We cherish the flaws in a handmade item. And making a formal poem You never get it absolutely perfect. You just go back and read Ozymandias and watch how Shelley messes up the rhyme scheme and then grabs hold of it by the end. To see that when you're doing this stuff, it's always, it's never possible to keep everything reined in all the time. Which leads me to the next poem, The Cliffs of Mistake. To know you're making a mistake as you make it, yet not be able to stop, is to step off a cliff, expecting to scramble backward and up through the air to stand on the outcrop you stepped from, even though it can't unhappen as you backpedal wildly with the second step, looking far, far below onto the moraine of pain you anticipate later, which is now only the pain of recognizing the result there's no leaping back from. Oh, God. And this is only a metaphor. Might this be what metaphors are for? To say what it's like before you hit what it is. In poetry workshops, there's always a great discussion about the pronoun I. You have had these discussions, have you not? Well, you're smiling, and a few people are laughing. I guess you have. There's always that tension, of course, between the personal and the universal. And then that, so this poem really has it. I'm kind of making a little bit of a, this reading has a bit of a shape, and we're going down now. We've made the mistake, and now we're going to Antarctica. The Blanket, and it has a subtitle, Antarctica. I woke to the voice of my dead sister. She was cold, she said, colder than she'd ever been in life. 8 years dead, freed from being used by our father, or so I thought, until I heard her. You, by the door, ready to leave this poem. Stay with me. Here I am, demanding that you listen, as she asks that I listen from beyond. She had no choice. That is living death, isn't it? Antarctica, the place without choice. Why? Why are you still down there? I call. Haven't you been reborn by now? Turned back into a blonde 8-year-old, tumbling down a hill. Oh, reader, excuse me. I have presumed on you, once again. Can't you help me? Heave the heavy lid of this chest and lift the blanket out. Help me toss it down to the end of the world. Well, here we are. It's perfectly obvious from these pieces of paper that I prepared for you. But you know, one of the things that happens is that the quality of emotion in the room is never the same as what was in your head when you were by yourself planning the reading. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to read for, is it Christiana? Yeah, I'm going to read you the Kim's Market poem. It's a different, it's not, I've wrecked my perfect arc now, but what are you going to do? So I'm moving out of this book a little bit and into Cornucopia, New and Selected Poems, and saying that idea of the 14 lines, well, let's see. There are multiple genre writers here. Are there creative nonfiction writers in this audience? Or are we all poets? There's one little hand, two little hands. What's the difference between a poem and an essay? Anyway, because a poem can think. You know, we can have thoughts that unwind in a poem. And in similar ways to how they unwind in an essay. And except that a poem, I think, always drives toward a lyric moment. And this is a narrative poem that I think does that. And it is, I couldn't find a form for it because it was something that I blurted out. I just came home from having the experience. Oh, I know, a speaker is supposed to have the experience. Well, I had the experience in the poem, and I came back and just wrote it down because it was extraordinary to me. And I didn't understand how to shape it for a really long time. And then I started counting, and lo and behold, I had 4 stanzas of 14 lines each. A favor of love. Thank you for making this sacrifice, I say to my husband as I run to Kim's Market. Never mind what the sacrifice is. Sacrifices between husbands and wives are private and fill a person with simple, healing water. Kim's buzzes with Sunday night customers as into the plastic basket go watercress, asparagus, garlic, pecans, when a girl throws herself through the plastic door flaps, tears streaming down her face, while her boyfriend catapults past the troughs of oranges, screaming, "Water! Water!" And Mr. Kim peers down his quizzical nose, and Mrs. Kim stands in mountain pose, openly hating that girl for dying of an overdose among the lemons, mangoes, papayas, and limes of the country of her family's origins, plunging among the plums and dying there, the color of a plum beneath her dark hair, for the girl is turning purple. From the back of the store by the water, the boyfriend shouts that she's swallowed a lollipop head. Now she is almost the color of an eggplant. And young Mr. Kim by the register is asking her, "Should I call 911?" in a pleasant, insistent whisper. "Should I call 911?" Big sounds should be booming from her, but only a bubble squeaks at her lips. "Call 911!" I speak for her, raising my woolen arm and aiming for her shoulder blades, where I whack and whack her again, and no lollipop pops out. But sound billows out. And like idiots everywhere, her boyfriend shouts, calm down," forcing water into her throat, which must help dissolve the candy my back slap dislodged. "Where's that choking victim's poster you're supposed to hang?" the boyfriend demands of Mr. Kim. "I'll cancel 911, he says. "Where is that lady?" the sobbing girl is asking. "Right here," I say. "I am right here behind you. I am putting endive in my basket." As she grabs me in a bear hug, and I see her face has a human color, and it is a hard face, strong and horsey. "Oh, Mommy!" she shouts. As my sister was dying, she called me Mommy. So, now I stand in mountain pose. And she looks up from a pile of plastic baskets. "My name is Marisol," she shouts. "My name is Molly." I'm afraid she might hear those L's as M's. "Thank you for saving my life." "Well, now, don't eat any more lollipops," I say, mommily, closing the cosmic circle begun at breakfast when my husband made the promise I still won't reveal. Grown human beings making sacrifices return to the universe a favor of love. Now I'm really ranging around here. I never read this villanelle that's in this book because I never find myself with the Rethke poem to refer to. But this looks like an audience that knows that poem. Do you all know that poem, The Waking? Some people are nodding. I don't know. It's okay not to know it. Let me know, because then I'll refer to it differently. If you don't know it, all right, okay. Well, at least one, all right. There's a couple of people. All right, The Waking is one of the most famous American villanelles. And it starts off, "I wake to sleep and take my waking slow." It is very heavily metered. You can really hear, "I wake to sleep and take my waking slow." It's this classic pentameter line. And I actually don't fully understand this poem. And there are probably people here who've read this poem all their lives and don't fully understand it. I don't really know what it means to wake to sleep and take your waking slow. I kind of know, but I couldn't write an essay about it exactly articulating it. But the rhythms were in me, and I began to think about it I began to think of this poem as a kind of, I don't know, as sort of like part of my literary family. And you can't choose your real family, as you all know. But you can choose your literary family, and that's in a way what people in this program are doing. You're choosing your literary families. You get to construct your literary family. That's one of the gorgeous aspects of being a writer, is constructing your literary family and picking and choosing and understanding that you're drawn to certain writers, and you don't even know why. They seem utterly unlike you, but you have these ties to them. And so I think of Lefke as one of my literary uncles. Most of my literary uncles are a lot older than he is, but he's one of them. So I wrote a kind of response, and here it is. Our waking. I sleep to wake and take my waking fast. I feel our fate in everything I fear. I learn by knowing that will never last. What makes me think I can escape the past? I hear hysteria shift into gear. I sleep to wake and take my waking fast. You, so close beside me. Are you aghast? God damn the ground. I stamp it madly here and learn by forcing that will never last. Dark takes the city, then the blast. The worm descends a twisting stair. You sleep, I wake, and take my waking fast. Great nature makes another protoplast, a seed for you and me in dampened air. We've learned by fearing that we'll never last. This quaking keeps us steady. It's our ballast. What rises up is always, but is far. We've learned by knowing nothing ever lasts. We sleep, we wake, and see our wakings vast. Now, I'm going to read a couple more poems, and then I'm going to stop and ask for questions. So here's a little poem, a love poem. It's just got one of those single images in it again. And I guess I think there are only two subjects of the lyric poem. Attachment, going towards something, love, or detachment, removing yourself from something, a loss or death. But this one's going toward. And I guess all of you have own at least one love poetry anthology. And you know that there's a huge opening section in a love poetry anthology. Those are the poems of unrequited love. And then there's a great, huge closing section in love poetry anthologies. Those are the post-love poems, the breakup poems, the after it's all over poems. And you're smiling, so I know there are people here who've written these poems. There is sometimes a slender section, a very slender section, of poems for married love. I hope I get to contribute a little bit to that section. Marriage. I watch my husband at a party, a shy boy, become a man at ease at last. Success freshens his face. The boy now free to pass beneath his expressions as if slipping under a fence. I used to slip under a fence, to swim in a stream-fed pond and laze in the water till shocked and delighted by a cold spot I swam through. That's what his face is like, infused by a source inside him. I know I have a part in it, just as I was part of the pond where I loved to swim. I'm going to take a chance here, read a brand new poem, and then take some questions, and then read my last poem. I'm writing a book-length poem. What's she doing that for? It's called Alphabetica, The Stories of the Letters. And this is the story of C. I'm trying to read a range of poems here so that we have short ones and long ones and narrative ones. This is a little bit of a narrative. It's called The Softy. When there was something C wanted to say, but he could only see it, not say it, he'd tell his father, "I can feel the answer in my mind." And he could, soft and oily as lamb's wool. "But I don't know the words for it." "Then you don't know the answer," capital C said. "You don't have an idea except in words." Yet C did too have an idea, soft and unformed as a penis on a sleeping boy. Years later, when his thought was aslumber, and when he went to whisper it over the phone to her, his father crept into his mind, as if from under a stairwell, and insisted he put it into words. "Oh," C said into the fleece of silence. "Oh," into the satin blanket of nothingness on the phone. "Oh, I love you." That was not really his idea. In his mind, it was much more complex and had as many spinnings to it as twists in yarn. He'd knit up his thought too early. She took it wrong. "I love you" really were the wrong words to say, for his longing was vague and curled, and those 3 words stood for 3,000 and fell as 3 boy warriors sacrificed for an army of 3,000. who stayed asleep in their tents. So she thought her hard thought, capitalized instantly in a traditional weave, a suit. Later, excuses of a nameless nature were made, and avoidances, nothing either had words for. Something the couples counselor could never unravel. But from that moment of false commitment, C felt the value of his silences. He was a soft C, while capital C had been hard, and his wife, his son's mother, was hard. Now, even as a grandfather with a rumpled blanket of a face, C did not often bother to speak. Saying things killed them. Why would a person want to close up a thought? Why not leave things open and receive? Then he hooked his grandchild under his arm and carried him up to bed, with his son walking upstairs beside them. Tucking the boy in after his grandpa left, the son explained, "Oh, Big C, he's a softie. He never says nothing." So that's a little fable. Now, it probably has occurred to you that, I am the sort of person you might ask a question to. Tim Green has been witness to a lot of answers to a lot of questions that I gave in a Rattle interview. So if nobody else has one, I'm sure that he can think of one. So I'd be more than happy to take questions. And please, don't feel that you have to ask me an intelligent question. I kind of prefer those stupid questions. I can answer those. Yes, Nan?
So, Amanda, you how people come to poetry. Starting out reader of poetry. Can you tell us a little bit about how you discovered poetry as a reader?
Oh, gosh. She thinks I'm going to say a certain thing, but I'm not exactly sure to what she's referring. So I may say a different thing. I'm not sure. I always wanted to be something special, but I didn't know what that special thing was. And there are, since there are people who are smiling here, I guess this is a shared experience. Okay. I did love language, and my mother was a reader. She was the kind of reader who, I came from a working class family. There were no books in our house. I was the first person in my family to go to college. But my mother did go to the library. She got out 7 novels, westerns and romances. And she'd bring them home, and she read them one a day. I think I became a writer, really, in order to have my mother read me. But I had a love of vocabulary and didn't quite know what to do with that until I was around 12. And I had a wonderful English teacher. And it turns out that she was 24 when I was 12. I thought she was 104, but she was only 24. And she made 7th grade in English into like an art column. We wrote every day. and we read poems every day and other things every day. And she took us into the library, and she said, okay, now everyone's going to pick a book and write a book report about it. And I thought, well, you know, aren't you going to give us any guidance? I mean, like anything? And I said, but what shall I read? And she said, well, what looks good to you? And I said, oh, those thin little books over there. They look good to me. And so she said, well, why don't you go over and pick one? So I ended up picking Keats. And I read, I didn't understand anything. But I felt something. And I do think that a poem enters you in some somatic, bodily way as you read it. And you don't understand it at first. And I think that makes some people very nervous. But other people feel right at home with the mystery and unknowingness of it. And I think I felt right at home with it. So wrote a paper that was completely gobbledygook. I mean, I really didn't know what I was doing. But I had contact with something that I felt was important and alluring. And luckily, I went to the kind of school that where teachers largely ignored poetry, so I got to read it all by myself. And decades later, I wrote a book called How to Read a Poem and Start a Poetry Circle, and I was reading from it in a bookstore in St. Paul, and a woman came up to me and said, you know, one of the people you dedicated this book to, your 7th grade teacher, that's my mother. And I said, oh my God. And of course, I thought she was dead because I thought she was over 5. And she was alive. And because she's really only 12 years older than I am, and at this point in life, I have to say, it's not a very big margin. So we have lunch. We talk about poetry. We talk about books, and it's an amazing and lovely reconnection. So just think about those teachers. Everybody in this room has a teacher who performed something like that favor for them that teacher performed for me. So just to think about that person and think about contacting them. She remembered my assignments. She said, don't you remember your Revolutionary War diorama? And I thought, wow. And there are actually a few people in LA that I taught when they were in 7th and 8th grade, and I remember their assignments. So you're in a great chain of literary being. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but somebody have a question?
I have a request, please.
Yes.
It seems to me that your little microphone pin,
Yes.
when you were reading,
Uh-huh.
I had difficulty following.
Oh.
It came to life in your post-reading
Oh.
session. It's one apart from the other.
Oh. Well, I'm glad I've come to life now. Yes.
I hope I'm not.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Thank you. You know.
No, not
maybe
at all.
I'm the only one alone. That's the impaired hearing.
No. People have said that to me before. What can I say? I'll try and do better next time. Yes.
I have a question as a fiction writer.
Yeah.
You said something that was really interesting to me. You said that a poem drives towards a lyric moment.
Yes.
What does that mean?
In a narrative poem, the narrative is in service of a discovery, as opposed to a narrative being in service of character. And you can have different characters in a narrative poem, but you never have that depth of development social landscape that you have in a story. Because narration in a story is to evoke the details of a whole world in service of the telling, the actual telling, the unfolding of the story in time. But I think that narrative in poetry goes toward some moment of discovery or recognition. Not that a story does. Stories, of course, have those moments. But I think that the whole narrative channels down to some moment of metaphor, some opening into another world, and at some moment of discovery. And the whole poem is usually in service of that moment of discovery, and a story is not necessarily in service of that moment. That may end up being the closing moment of a story, but I think that a story is about character, and a narrative in a poem is never really about character in the same way. And now, it's a bit traditional because, of course, there's a very contemporary fiction does not necessarily have character in it, but I think that comes closer to poetry. I mean, there's a lot of blurred lines between those genres, and lyric essays too. Where are we going to put those? There's a lot of blurring of genre, I think, in 21st century writing, and I think perhaps this is the century of the blurred genre. And there's a tremendous economic blurring across the world in terms of boundaries. There's gender blurring, culture blurring, that huge mix, the idea of a global culture and a global enterprise, I think does enter literature in the blurred boundaries between genres.
Makes it loss of translation.
Yeah, a little bit. Yes, Jackie.
I know on this little handout, mentions that you were studying how young adults connect to poetry, college boards, and are you actively doing that?
No, they stopped this program. They had me come and talk to high school advanced placement English teachers. Because apparently there's always a poetry question on the advanced placement, and not very many people take it. And because it's really hard. I mean, those questions are just, I would want to take them either. I'd write about the novel in Flash before I'd write about those poetry questions. But I tried to teach teachers ways in which students might connect to those kinds of poems and write about them. Because I'm interested in that. And I'm interested in that situation in high school where people sort of click off to poetry, and what the mechanics of that are, and how we might make that a little bit better. Because there's probably not a 15-year-old girl out there in the intelligent universe who isn't writing a poem or two and posting them on her blog. There's a whole life of poetry out there that's kind of extracurricular. But also, I think those are the same people who kind of turn off to poetry in school. And it was my little stab at trying to do something about that. Yes?
Who are some of your other literary relatives?
Among the long dead relatives, the 10th century Chinese poet Li Qingzhao, I'm probably mispronouncing that, John Donne, George Herbert, 17th century mystic, wonderful, wonderful poet. The irascible and personally difficult but poetically magnificent Philip Larkin. Elizabeth Bishop. I have little secret 18th century favorites. I'm a big fan of Phyllis Wheatley. I know that people say that she's like overboiled Alexander Pope, but I've got a tremendous soft spot for Phyllis Wheatley. Gosh, who else? That's pretty good for openers. Anybody else?
Oops, I was very interested about what you said between the relationship between form and content, and Richard Howard's explanation or illumination that form is the skeleton and content is the flesh,
Yes.
rather than the other way around. And so when might be an impossible question, but in your process or in your do you ever write into a form, or do you feel like the form emerges as you write the poem?
No, I write into a form. I so write into a form that I actually make a chart on the page. So that, when I wrote that villanelle, I actually blocked it out on the page because I can get very messed up, and I need the guidelines. That's how I've taught kids to write them, and I do that myself. So yes, in that way, I'm writing into the form. I rarely take something I've written and then try to push it into a form. That's when I think you're really trying to, put a big foot in a small sock or something. It doesn't usually work for me, but it works for some people. Some people do that. If there's one thing I'm humble about, it's people's imaginations and how they work. I'm in a way a student of people's imaginations, and I think that increasingly I cannot generalize from my own. They're really how people create. There are some general rules, but it's quite highly individual, and it changes over time. Over your lifetime, it will change. And that's if you're calm enough about it, it's a fascinating thing to watch in your own life. I'm going to read two poems to close because I realize I tried to give you a little bit of a sense of my work, and I haven't read much of a sexy poem, so I thought I should do that and then kind of read my closing poem. Well, I don't know, maybe I should read the Sheila and the Gig poem. I never read this out loud. This is the first. Somehow you calmed me down and feel like I'm able to do that this year. This could be a big error. It might be the first and last time I read this. I never knew what a Sheila and a Gig was until I've gone to Ireland quite a bit. The reason being, I'm married to a James Joyce scholar. And I found, and I don't have a literary life in Ireland. I have one in Canada, and because I'm a dual citizen and I live in two countries, and I hide out in Ireland. I think I can't have a literary life in yet another country. I have one now, because I go there so often, I've begun to have one. But for a while there, I could do a lot of writing, kind of quietly. So I saw these Sheilas, and I could not believe them. And this is a description of one, really. This is all it is just a description of this this gargoyle. It's a kind of gargoyle that you see in Ireland, an ancient kind of gargoyle. Sheila McGig, lady on her haunches, squats with arms down, pulling her pudenda away from her clitoris, which launches out of her stone-sculpted body a crowd that even when wind and hail blast away her dugs and ribs and ears and bald head, snorks past any dilemma of what it is. Sex flung wide above a church door. A masturbating gargoyle wed to worship, her bulging eyes popping in an orgasm, or death, or warning, or in the puckered surprise of the release of her God inside, old, old among the folds. Of wraith wisdom this, self-love. It's tough to rhyme with love. You have to rhyme it with of, or glove. I mean, it's and here's my last one. Before that, I just want to thank Bridget for inviting me here. I want to thank Andrew Carter Brown, who's a fabulous poet, the author of The Disheveled Bed, who is my host here, who drove me here. I want to thank Nan, and Tim Green, whom I've known through email, and just to say that I enjoyed you as an audience. You're really attentive. It's lovely, and then I'll read my last poem now. The Flaw. The best thing about a handmade pattern is the flaw. Sooner or later, in a hand-loomed rug, among the squares and flattened triangles, a little red nub might soar above a blue field, or a purple cross might sneak in between the neat ochre teeth of the border. The flaw we live by, the wrong color floss, now reads among the uniform strands, and because it does not match, makes a red bird fly, turning blue field into sky. It's almost, after long silence, a word spoken aloud, a hand saying through the flaw, I'm alive, discovered by your eye. Thank you very much.
Joining us, and I should just say tomorrow at 4 p.m. in this room there's going to be a hybrid poetry reading. David St. John edited an anthology and has 3 poets reading, Molly Bendel, Ralph Angel, and Mary Jo Bang. And then come back in February, we're having the first reading of our spring series. It's going to be at the Natural History Museum. It's actually going to be about Charles Darwin's influence on Elizabeth Bishop, and Jory Graham will be there, and Stephen Yenzer, and some other folks. So keep an eye out for that. And Molly will probably be willing to sign books if people. You can start with mine. So thank you so much for joining us. Oh, and there's a reception. Have a glass of wine or cookie.
I will. Oh, good. And